Ladies, gentlemen, and Spiritborn of all ages, it's back and it is way better. Spiritborn has a ton of really powerful, interesting, and fun potential build concepts, and soon we'll be getting into a lot of these just each one by one, but at first we have to start with the ones just really right at the top of power. The other day we talked about how an evade build had cropped up after release that was basically a one-button build, very simple but very strong, and that just really wasn't a thing that people expected to do as well as it was doing. After a fairly large amount of fiddling with it though, it's only gotten better. When I finished that build, I was sat there staring at it and I was thinking, this could be improved, but struggling to work out exactly how to do it until it struck me. Fists of Fate, specifically on top of Fists of Fate itself being the equivalent of a 50% damage multiplier if you get it at a maximum roll. Mine is a bit under that, so it's closer to a 45% multiplier. We also get the beauty that is Fists of Fate's lucky hit chance. This makes it reliable to proc the aspect of Exhilaration, which exists to give you lucky hit chance to reduce your evade cooldown by its full duration. Moving this into the build then, for the cost of an aspect slot, frees up your weapon slot entirely, and this causes a whole cascade of potential gear swaps that increase our damage exponentially. The entire benefit that we got from Sepizantek as a unique was the fact that it let us create an infinite evade combo within our setup. But with these two swaps, we get that anyways, and it frees up the most important equipment slot in the game, a two-handed weapon. So we take full advantage of that to bring in a ton of damage that we didn't have space for before. We also upgrade to using a mythic unique helmet over not doing so before for two main reasons. The first is we are now deep enough in the actual release of the season that a mythic unique is far from unobtainable for the people who are farming bosses in endgame, though I will talk about the alternative, which is Loyalty's Mantle. The specific effect that we're after from this helmet is the part where it says having matching Spirit Hall choices makes your Spirit Hall 100% more potent. This reads as doubling damage. The thing is, after testing with Air of Perdition, at least as far as this build works, it doesn't actually do what it says, because the weapon swap that we've made allows us to put the Eagle Hall primary Spirit Hall potency stat on our quarterstaff, and it seems that having both of these bonuses together actually dilutes the bonus from the helmet. Put simply, the helmet's bonus is acting as if it is a pure implicit affix that reads plus 100% primary Eagle Spirit potency, and what this means is because you can easily get up to 100% of that stat on our legendary weapon itself, the bonus from having the helmet actually doesn't double our damage anymore. It increases it by maybe 40%, 50% at best. This is particularly important because there is a new mythic unique helmet with a larger bonus to offer specifically for things like storm feathers, and with far better actual affixes on it too, and it lets us change even more than this as well. All that said, the build is just very different from when I talked to you about it just a couple of days ago, so today let's talk about the Eagle-Rilla Featherstorm build, now capable of hitting upwards of 4.2 billion damage, with 1.5 billion being a much more common number to see. And this is with me missing a lot of power still from not having ancestral aspects dropped from my codex yet, and just having patchy as hell masterworking despite farming about 4 Helltides in a row last night searching for forbidden souls. Hey, Future Cotton here. They've given us a hotfix since I put this together, fixing forgotten soul drop rates, which as someone who spends way too many resources trying different things out is an absolute godsend, so look forward to more upgraded versions of Spiritborn builds in the future. That said, let's break down the skill tree and why we make the choices that we do, the Spirit Hall choices that we get to make now that our helmet is swapped out, our uniques in general and legendaries as well, the ideal stats, tempering and masterworking, gems and runewords, your ideal mercenary setup choices, and then your Paragon board setup, followed by just some tips that I have mostly for making the build more comfortable after quite a few hours with it up to this point. First things first, we take thunderspike for your basic skill, and we put 4 points into it just because we need to spend these points somewhere in the first two clusters, and these are the simplest and most effective really. Then we take the enhanced thunderspike and accelerated thunderspike enhancement, which also causes evade to proc thunderstrike automatically and makes enemies vulnerable when it does. It's also worth noting that the third cast with thunderspike just in general reduces your evade cooldown by its full duration, but if that part comes into play, it means that you've made a gameplay error with this build, as this isn't actually how we reset our evades anymore. It's just an emergency backup more than anything. After that, we have the focus cluster here, where we're going to be picking up the Ravager active skill, enhanced Ravager and also replenishing Ravager. Altogether, when activated, this gives you extra hits on any attack that you do, stacking up more bonus hits against elites when you self-heal, which we do quite a lot of, and also extending its duration when you kill an enemy. The main thing that we have this for though is activating a specific passive that we'll talk about in a little bit, and the skill also just passively sets you locked at 2 ferocity minimum, which at the very least ups our lucky hit chance in this setup. Then we take 1 rank in the focal passive here, which is mostly just as a gateway for 3 ranks in the apex passive for 9% bonus damage to vulnerable enemies, doubled against elites and bosses. We also take diminishment for 15% damage reduction from vulnerable enemies as well. Then we pick up 3 ranks of Mirage. This gives us dodge chance when we evade, which we do constantly, so we have this dodge chance quite actively. And when you dodge an attack, you gain crit chance, which is a fantastic stat for us. Then we take 3 ranks of unrestrained power for bonus damage when unstoppable or unhindered, and we are just permanently unstoppable in this build. Then we move to the defensive node cluster here, and we're going to start by taking all 5 ranks of Armored Hide, as well as its enhancement and reinforced Armored Hide. Altogether, this makes us passively generate 2 resolve every 5 seconds, which is irrelevant really honestly, because when we activate the skill, we get set to maximum resolve stacks just by default. We get 100% block chance increase, we get increased block damage reduction, and we get some thorns too, just as a sort of bonus. One of our main goals is to keep this skill at 100% uptime, and we do that quite effectively through a passive that we'll talk about in a further cluster. Then we pick up Concussive Stomp, as well as its first enhancement, but nothing further. The enhancement makes Concussive Stomp give us a barrier when it hits enemies, and while Concussive Stomp is not a skill that we actively use or trigger manually on our active bar, we activate the skill through the use of a Runeword instead, accomplishing both more barrier gained for us to work with and simultaneously counting as using a gorilla skill every time that it procs, which keeps the unyielding hits aspect active more permanently with our Runeword setup. This is a build that requires a number of specific things to work the way that it does, but when you have them, it is absolutely insanely powerful for the actual skill expression required to play it. After that, we pick up Counterattack as our next skill, and its enhancement as well as reinforced counterattack. The passive of this gives us dodge chance and makes us hit enemies that we dodge attacks from, which is fine, but the only real reason that we use this skill is the reinforced bonus enhancement. This gives us bonus critical damage per close enemy just permanently as a passive effect, so this is really strong when we have high crit chance, and we are stacking crit anyways. Then there is the active effect, which gives you 100% dodge chance while it's active, and this is actually a negative to use with our full build. One of the ways that we scale our damage is through the redirected force aspect, which increases your critical damage for a percentage of your block chance. This effect is doubled if you have blocked an attack recently. The way the game works, dodge stat takes priority over your block stat, so if you have 100% dodge chance, you will never actively block, which means for this setup you need to have this skill on your bar, but never actually press it, which actually synergizes a little bit with another of our gear choices later on. After this, we have Scourge as well as its enhancement, and also Adaptive Scourge. This slows and fears enemies on use, but the enhancements are where the real power comes from for us. The first being a stacking damage to crowd-controlled enemies damage multiplier every time that you do damage with this skill, and we have it active frequently enough to keep this buff at full stacks consistently, which is 50% bonus crowd-controlled damage. Then the second enhancement gives us lucky hit chance to lifesteal up to 35% of our maximum health when hitting an enemy affected by Scourge. Again, we can keep this at very high uptime, so this is active consistently. Then we're going to be taking some passives here, 1 rank of Endurance, mostly just as a gateway to let us take 3 ranks of Perseverance. This gives us bonus damage reduction per stack of Resolve. One way that we scale this build is with bonus Resolve stacks, so this in turn raises our defense with this passive too. Then we pick up 1 rank of the Patient Guard passive. This gives us 10% block chance, which directly translates to damage, so it's great in itself. This doesn't increase with further ranks, so 1 rank is perfect, and it also lets us use this as a gateway for 3 ranks of Auspicious, which gives us 3% maximum life gained as barrier every second, up to 30% maximum from this effect. This effect drops off if you take HP damage, but being hit while in a barrier does not deactivate this, so as long as your barrier stays active, you will permanently be gaining 3% maximum health as barrier per second, forever. After this, we have our Potency skill tree as well, where we'll only be taking passives. 3 ranks of Resilient over here for bonus maximum health after using a Gorilla skill, and this is currently kept up by Concussive Stomps being cast by the Runeword, but if they change how that functions for whatever reason, this version of the build is sort of patch-proof for that specific interaction, because we keep Armored Hide at 100% uptime, which is also a Gorilla skill and is actually manually cast from the bar, so we cast it frequently enough for this to stay active. After that, we take 1 rank of Dominant, mostly just for the 5% execute chance on non-elites, which does not increase chances the more points that you take in the passive anyways, so 1 point is really good here. Then we take 3 ranks of Brilliance as a passive for bonus damage with Eagle skills per bonus movement speed that you have. For whatever reason, the term Eagle skill seems to actually affect Storm Feathers, which are the main source for damage, despite not technically being a skill so much as a sub-power, so this does increase our damage a fairly large amount. Then we take 2 ranks of Acceleration for 2 bonus evade charges is the main purpose here. These essentially act as a safety net for us. If you don't proc Lucky Hit on the first evade, you can proc it on the second and still get the reset. However, our Lucky Hit chance is so high in this setup that situation only happens if you evade with no enemies around to hit to begin with. Then we take 3 ranks of the Potent passive for a stacking damage buff when you hit enemies with Jaguar skill damage. Ravager's extra hits count for stacking this buff, which which is our main build-up for it, and so do counterattacks, dodge, retaliate, and the Hunter ultimate's main damage, so we stack this quite effectively. This is also the absolute prime passive skill to get ranks of on your amulet. As for higher tier content where you can get to maximum stacks, this can boost your damage by up to 10% per rank, which is nuts for a passive. Then we move on to the ultimate skill cluster, and here we'll be picking up the Hunter as well as its enhancements, of course. This gives us an ultimate skill that has a chance to reset its own cooldown on hit, but also increases all damage that you do to injured enemies by 100% for 8 seconds after you cast. And even more importantly, not only does it max out your ferocity stacks, but it overfills the maximum you have by 4. So we go to more ferocity stacks than we possibly could without it. This is important because, again, we activate it pretty constantly, and our evade resetting aspect we talked about before is lucky hit chance based, and the lucky hit chance for that specific aspect is increased for each ferocity stack that you have. So having bonus ferocity stacks from this gives us more lucky hit chance, which gives us even more consistent evade resets, and that's one of the multiple reasons that we switched off of the Devourer from the mid-tier version of the build that we were using before. That said, the other reason is because it lets us use our passives a bit more liberally in this cluster, and let's talk about how we do that now. 3 ranks of resolution for bonus damage after casting an ultimate skill to elite enemies. It doubles this bonus if you're fighting only one enemy, but this only lasts for 3 seconds, so if you're using a long-lasting ultimate, this doesn't help all that much, whereas if you're using the Hunter, which resets itself, this does add quite a bit. This also lets it take 1 rank of Spiritual Attunement, which is entirely just a gateway for 3 ranks of Supremacy. Any enemies that you kill while an ultimate skill is active gives you a stack of this effect, stacking up to 30%. When your ultimate skill's effect ends, you also gain 5 stacks of this just for free, but you start to lose 1 stack every second. What the Hunter lets us do is keep the effects rolling, keep the attacks coming, but because it resets itself and the duration is short, what you sort of do is take advantage of that last line where you gain 5 stacks of Supremacy every time the skill ends. So here we take advantage of the skill ending rather than its duration. Then we take 1 rank of Sustenance, which is mostly just as a gateway, for 2 ranks, specifically exactly 2 ranks of Intricacy. I absolutely adore this passive and the effect that it has on builds, and this is how we keep 100% Armored Hide active uptime more than anything else. We use these 2 free casts after using our ultimate to stretch out our active time on Armored Hide, and with my current gear, with the exact values that I have it in the spot where if the Hunter does not reset its cooldown by killing an enemy, these 2 casts are the exact amount to bridge the gap until the Hunter comes back off cooldown, so the combo is permanent and infinite. Then finally we have our key passive for this, and to put it simply, if you do not have all of our rare nodes active on the Paragon board due to levels or glyph upgrades, then actually Adaptive Stances is technically a larger increase, but where I am at, I have all of my nodes upgraded even without the bonus core skill. The bonus core stats bonus from this, which makes it a better choice to use Vital Strikes for a permanent vulnerable damage multiplier that also has bonus effects when hitting a vulnerable enemy, such as a % life heal per each hit. The thing is, this also makes you remove vulnerable when you hit an enemy too, but we counteract that with a fun interaction with the Accursed Touch aspect. This aspect gives people Vampiric Curse, which makes them become vulnerable repeatedly. That's just how this aspect functions, rather than only being made vulnerable once. So the moment that you remove vulnerable with the key passive, it will instantly reapply because of the way this effect works, removing the actual negative entirely from the key passive. As well, because this is triggered off of lucky hit chance, it synergizes with our massive lucky hit chance too. That does it for the skill tree then, so let's move on to the Spirit Hall choices. The primary hall is of course still Eagle, as the storm feathers created by evading with this are the entire focus of our damage. Then the secondary Spirit Hall choice actually opens up once you switch the mythic unique version of the build. The best choice then, once you have that, is Gorilla for the permanent unstoppable when above 5 resolve stacks, as well as 2 bonus maximum resolve stacks. Again, resolve stacks translate to pure damage increase for us, as does being unstoppable, so this is just a really solid and fitting bonus now that we can use it as well. After that, let's talk about gear, starting with the mythic unique that we're using. Here we are using the Heir of Perdition. I went through the sort of explanation of why Loyalty's mantle falls off once you change weapons, and the reason it is replaced is this mythic unique's effect is essentially just deal 60% more damage permanently. The ideal roll for greater affix on this, and the masterworking goal too, is crit chance though, because this helmet comes with like 20% crit chance base, which is absolutely nuts when masterworking or greater affix on top of, so this can be a large portion of your crit chance for the build, especially when masterworked. The lucky hit chance that's on it is also good, but we get so much of that from a different source, and the same thing with movement speed too. Then we have 3 other uniques that we use in this version of the build too. The first is Jacinth Shell. We out-heal the negatives of this effect by not spending vigor like it wants, but instead through Adaptive Scourge and the healing from Vital Strikes, combined with the fact that we have a permanent hefty barrier active, high maximum health, and on this chest piece there is damage reduction while injured too, which most importantly does apply underneath barrier effects, which is a neat combo too. The best masterworking choices on this, or best greater affixes, are maximum life and damage reduction while injured, both serving a similar purpose really. But in general, the main thing that this chest piece does is just reduce our cooldowns by essentially 75% as a separate effect from the cooldown reduction stat too, so they can stack together even further, and this is part of what allows us to have such high uptime on Armored Hide and on our ultimate too. Then we have the Fists of Fate, but specifically you want a pair of Fists of Fate with a really high actual effect roll, as if you can get a 300% roll, that makes it a 50% damage increase. Then it also comes with crowd control application to help get staggers faster on bosses. More than anything, it has more crit chance, which we do love. And then it just has an absurd potential lucky hit chance roll, which helps funnel our multiple lucky hit chance bonuses at the center of the build. You don't need a greater affix on lucky hit chance like I do for this, you just need a decent roll on lucky hit chance and then getting a couple of masterworking procs on it afterwards, and then you're golden. Then the final unique for this is sort of one of two, which is either Yen's Blessing or Rakanoth's Wake. Rakanoth's Wake is technically better as an option with both non-physical damage increase and also cooldown reduction as affixes, but Yen's Blessing is the one of the two that I have had drop with greater affix, all element resistance, which is the main requirement for this piece. It also helps fill any gaps with Armored Hide in case there's any user error in actually resetting it, because you can sort of mess up in the timing, because if you use Evade multiple times in a row between using Armored Hide and the Hunter, it won't actually do the reset. So if you do that, then this helps fill in the gap. However, the main reason that we use this is again just the giant all element resist stat, which if you get greater affix and then you hit all of your masterworking procs on too, can be the vast majority of your resistances for even Torment 4. After that, then let's talk about our weapon. You want a quarterstaff for the block chance specifically, and you want it to be an ancestral weapon ideally too. Those are your two highest priorities. Past that, dexterity is the ideal greater affix roll, then you want maximum life and critical damage. For tempering, you absolutely need primary Eagle Spirit Hull potency at the best roll you can get it. Then you also want Stormfeather potency from Eagle Augments 2 in your offensive slot. The ideal masterwork on this is primary Eagle Spirit Hull potency by far, and of course the actual aspect that we have on this is redirected force, and as you can see my actual aspect roll on this is far off of max, so that's at least one place my damage could go up significantly. Then we have our amulet for the build too, and the most important thing that you can find for an amulet, for this especially, is a greater affix total armor percent. This does the bulk of our armor scaling for the aspect that is on the amulet as well, unyielding hits. If you can get 3 hits on a masterworking on a greater affix total armor percent amulet, then you can even move some legendary aspects around to get this out of your amulet slot, but I'm quite a distant from that personally. That's a bit of a pipe dream. The rest of the affixes that you want on the amulet then are dexterity percent gain, which is super important this season, but then also 2 ranks of potent is just the ideal passive for bonus ranks, as we talked about in the skill tree section. For our tempering affixes, you want Stormfeather potency gain, and this will be in all slots for offensive tempers that remain. Then in your second slot, you want a defensive temper. Mine failed here even after 14 separate rolls, but the amulet is too good for me to drop even without the actual proper roll there, and this roll would ideally instead be bonus maximum stacks of resolve, which as mentioned earlier translate to pure damage and defense gain in this build. Then on our rings, we have dexterity, maximum life, and crit chance as the ideal affixes on both of them, with the ideal rolls with masterworking or greater affixes being split between the dexterity and the crit chance. You want a lot of crit chance, but you don't want every single thing to be piled on crit chance, or else you might actually overpass, especially if you're masterworking Eredition. For tempers on both of your rings, you want Stormfeather potency and the Hunter cooldown reduction. Having this temper on both rings is what lets the Hunter cooldown match the cooldown of Armored Hide after 2 free uses of duration and enables our infinite loop. On this, we also use the acceleration aspect, and this is how we reset our evade within this build, with lucky hit chance on vulnerable enemies increased per ferocity stack. For your other ring, you want the accursed touch aspect for lucky hit chance to apply vampiric curse to enemies, which constantly applies vulnerable while active and finishes our big synergies off for the key passive and evading as well, and this will be active a lot because again, Fist of Fate, lots of lucky hit chance. Then our final slot is going to be pants, and for this you want the interdiction aspect. This increases your block chance per stack of resolve that you have, and block chance as a stat can technically be over 100%. So we get 100% from permanent Armored Hide being active, we could be getting up to 15% block chance per resolve stack from these pants, and we can easily hit 16 or more maximum resolve stacks, which then makes this funnel insanely into the redirected force aspect, and that's the main damage engine going on under here. On this slot as well, for pants you want dexterity, maximum life, and most importantly, armor, with the ideal greater affix roll being armor itself. For tempers, you want barrier generation as utility, and bonus bonus maximum resolve stacks as your temper, with the bonus maximum resolve stacks being your ideal target for masterworking on this slot as well, though you might want to split it with armor unless you have that greater affix armor roll. That does it for the gear itself then. So for the gems, you want skulls in your jewelry for the flat armor gain that these give. You want emeralds in your actual armor for the non-rune slots at least, and then for your rune words, you want the evade cast grants offering combined with Spiritborn concussive strike. Then in your other slot, you want the rune that grants offering per moving a short distance combined with the earthen bulwark rune, doubling down on our barrier creation to make our outer layer of safety that much stronger. All that covered then, let's go over our mercenary choices quite quickly. The best primary choice is right here. Going down this right track here will give you 15% bonus all element resistance, as well as giving you a couple of different damage multipliers based on his different abilities, though they do lock in place when they go down, so they're not the most reliable. If you are able to hit your proper resistance caps without this passive here as part of her here, which you'll be able to do if you get 2 masterworking hits on greater affixed resistance to all elements boots, which I don't quite have yet, but if I did, I would switch it over to the left track so that I could take Rahir's guard for an extra 15% armor to funnel into unyielding hits, and also this lets you go to the Mocking Lure passive, which is a much more reliable singular damage multiplier. Then for our reinforcement, we instead are going to be taking Variana with the Bloodthirst skill we use on every skill cast that we do, just so we can get the occasional attack speed boost, which just gives us a bonus to everything that we do that isn't evade, basically. Then moving on, let's talk about our Paragon board setup for the build, going through the whole thing. From the starting board, you want to go up the right side here through the rare node that increases damage over to the glyph itself. Inside of this first glyph sock, we're going to be putting the Spirit glyph for bonus critical damage, bonus damage to enemies each time that you crit them, and a legendary bonus of damage to elite enemies, which is great too. We then grab a bunch of dexterity in the radius here too, with the note that this is one of the best places you can dump extra skill points if you have more Paragon points than I do at the time that I'm making this. We then head up the right side and out of the top side of the board to attach on the Convergence board here. We go up and right to the legendary node itself through the all element resist and bonus armor nodes, and the node itself here gives us bonus damage for a portion of our highest elemental damage bonuses. The main way that we power this is just by getting more than 200% bonus lightning damage, which reaches the maximum bonus this node can give us. Then we head back and through to the glyph socket of this board and stick in the Jagged Plume glyph. This increases Storm Feather potency and gives us a stacking buff when we interact with Storm Feathers, as well as having a lightning damage increase multiplier for a legendary bonus, and our main damage source is lightning, so this is quite good. We grab the rare nodes in the radius and the dexterity to activate it as well, but a little bit more than we need because this is the second best place to dump bonus Paragon points if you have more than I do for the extra dexterity, of course. Another stop here if you have more points than I do would be this rare node over here for bonus maximum life and bonus all resistance, just to help sort of shore those up a little bit more. Then we head out the left side of the board here and we'll be attaching on the Sapping board. This makes it so casting 3 skills from the same Guardian base type in a row increases your damage for a few seconds afterwards. We do this by proccing thunderspike through evade, so every 3 evades that we do in a row, this will activate. First though, we go to the glyph socket of the board 2. For the rare and magic nodes that are on the way, we get damage and dexterity, but mostly we get the glyph socket itself, inside of which we put our Fulminate glyph, and this one is pretty funky, honestly. It gives you bonus lightning damage for each bit of intelligence node purchased in the radius, so we are going to be grabbing every single intelligence node that is in the radius, but it also gives it secondary bonus depending on dexterity purchased, so you also have to hit the minimum dexterity threshold to get the bonus damage from that too. We then head through another armor and all resist combo rare node, down to another all resist rare node near the bottom of the board, and over to the legendary node itself on the left. After this, we drop down out of the bottom exit of the board, and here we'll be sticking on the Viscous Shield board, which is quite an important one. We take a turn to the right at the beginning of this, just to put on the barrier generation and critical strike damage, rare and magic nodes, which are quite good. Then we head down and over to the glyph socket itself through the rare and magic nodes that are on the way. Within this glyph socket, we're putting the Headhunter glyph. This gives you a bonus to all of your normal nodes within the radius, so this gives you a bunch of just sort of core stats. You can use this to shore up any holes that you have that prevent you from reaching rare node activation, but this build does reach that quite easily once you have more Paragon points. This also gives us a legendary bonus that's just more damage, which is quite good, and then after that we grab the actual dexterity to activate this within the radius, and then a little bit more to give us some bonus dexterity. We grab all the rare and magic nodes because obviously they're quite strong here, and then we'll be going around the top to get to the legendary node itself for the board, which gives you bonus damage dependent on how much of your maximum life you have as barrier. barrier. We have very high barrier generation, we barrier for most of our maximum life all the time, so this should be at pretty much maximum bonus unless you're just getting absolutely slapped in the face. Then we head out the left side here through the armor and maximum life rare magic nodes, then down to make sure you grab the damage reduction while barriered rare node, because this is a very, very important damage reduction. That's an extra bit that you won't be able to get otherwise, and it does help us reach the actual point that we get to. Then you want to head out the left side of the board here and attach on our final board, which is drive. You want to immediately head up here to get to the rare magic node that reduces damage taken while you are moving. Evade counts as moving, so every time you evade, you have this damage reduction, and we constantly evade, so we will have this active permanently. This also gives us maximum life, which is just a nice bonus. Then we go over to the legendary node itself, which is drive, which gives you 3% extra damage for 10 seconds every time that you move 10 meters. This does not reset the actual sort of reduction timer every time that you gain a stack like most buffs do, which means that you have to move 100 meters every 10 seconds to stay at 10 stacks. This build can do that in open enough scenarios in a big enough room. If you just absolutely spam left to right with the evades back and forth, you can reach 10 stacks, but more likely you'll be sitting more around 7 or 8, which is still a very solid 21 to 24% damage increase for the build. Then we'll be moving on through the rare magic nodes to the center to get to the glyph socket itself, inside of which we're putting in the colossal glyph, which is a little bit funky for this. This boosts your gorilla skill damage as the additive that it gives, which means nothing to us, honestly, but its multiplier is bonus damage per resolve stack that you have. I'm currently at 16 maximum resolve stacks, which would make that a 32% multiplier, which is, well, colossal. And again, my amulet doesn't even have the actual roll of that temper, so I can have even more maximum resolve stacks quite easily. After that, we grab the strength that's required to activate and the rare nodes within the radius 2. Then with any spare points, you pretty much just want to clean up any relevant rare magic nodes that we haven't gotten. Otherwise, you want to put them directly into the dexterity within the radius of the spirit glyph, and if you've already gotten all the dexterity within that radius, you want to move it to the dexterity in the jagged plume radius. That just about does it for the Paragon board then, and for actually setting up the build. So now let's talk about actually playing it for yourself. My biggest recommendation instantly is to rebind your evade key to something on your mouse. You cannot hold the evade button to have evade cast repeatedly, you have to hit the button on repeat, and spacebar made my hand tired very quickly when I did that in the process of playing this build, so we adjust to a mouse button for quality of life. Aside from that, never press counterattack to activate it. You never want an active, you just want the passive effects. Ravager only use when it is running out, Scourge use on cooldown to keep the buff at maximum stacks and constantly apply crowd control, and then Armored Hide you want to use right before the Hunter ultimate. You then will get 5 seconds in the window to use Armored Hide 2 more times. You want to sort of time the second free cast as late as possible in the duration, and this should line up with the Hunter cooldown even without a reset to let you infinitely have Armored Hide even against bosses with no reset potential. Then finally, outside of all of that, just evade a ton. Spam evade. As long as you hit an enemy with it, you cannot run out of evades because of the way that it just sort of works. With our stats, it is logistically impossible. However, if you miss enemies or you cast evade when things aren't around, you can always just hit an enemy once with thunderspike and the rest of our effects will activate to immediately refresh the cooldown anyways. That just about does it then, everyone. The significantly improved Stormfeather Evade Spiritborn build. I've cleared a tier 90 pit in right around 5 minutes with this, so speed farm level essentially, and I still have so much more room for this to grow with my gear before this reaches its actual capped peak. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.